Well, hey there, idiots. Welcome back to Observe. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the Fox Hollow murders out at Fox Hollow Farm. More on that in just a second. Let's go ahead and roll the intro first. Over the past few years, I've been on the receiving end of some pretty distasteful stalking behavior, which not only threatened my own safety, but also the safety of some people that I care about. During this period, the helplessness that I felt was rather palpable, especially in that I couldn't really afford anyone to hire so that they could maybe help me navigate and handle it. Today's sponsor, Incogni, however, helped add a level of peace of mind by reaching out to various data brokers on my behalf, requesting my personal data be taken down, and then handling any of the objections from their side. It was also relieving that they didn't simply help out with like one round of things and then abandon me to tread water alone. Instead, they made sure that my data stayed off of the market by conducting repeated removals, taking that data down whenever it popped up again. I had always heard how ill-intended characters could use things like people search sites to track down personal information about you and or your loved ones to use in inappropriate or even illegal ways, but I had been able to personally avoid it up until recently. As it turns out, despite these sites having guidelines indicating on how they should or should not be used, criminals have been known to disregard those guidelines and use the information on these sites to target their victims. Incogni has both an individual plan and a family plan, which you can add up to 4 loved ones onto your annual subscription and keep their personal information off of data broker and people search sites. It's easy to set up as well. All that you do is create an account, kind of define what information you would like to have scrubbed from the internet, grant Incogni the right to work for you, and then you just sit back and let them go to work. Also, with their 30-day risk-free period, anyone can try it out for themselves and still get a full refund if they're not happy with the service. So, if you would also like to be able to take control over how much of your personal information is just available out there for anyone to access and use, try Incogni. Plus, if you use the code OBSERVE60 with the link in the description of this video, you will get an exclusive 60% off of an annual Incogni plan. Thanks again to Incogni for sponsoring today's video, and back to your regularly scheduled programming. Okay, to provide a bit of a backstory, in 1996, Indiana authorities uncovered one of the most disturbing crime scenes in the state's history. What began as a missing persons investigation would eventually take them to Fox Hollow Farm, an 18-acre estate in Westfield. Here, human remains belonging to multiple individuals were found scattered across the grounds. The man at the center of it all was a seemingly ordinary husband, father, and businessman, Herbert Baumeister. This case, officially investigated and documented by the Hamilton County Sheriff's Department, the Indiana State Police, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, remains open in many aspects to this day, particularly in efforts to identify the victims still unknown. Here's a brief summary pulled from the FBI Vault, WRTV investigative reports and coverage, and Hamilton County Sheriff's Office documentation. In the late 1980s through the mid-1990s, local law enforcement in Indianapolis began receiving a growing number of missing persons reports. These cases shared a striking commonality. The victims were young men, often seen in or near gay nightclubs in downtown Indianapolis. One victim's friend, Mark Anthony Goodyear, operating under the pseudonym Tony, in interviews with law enforcement eventually led police to a man he suspected had something to do with the disappearances. That man was Herb Baumeister. According to law enforcement affidavits, Goodyear had visited Baumeister's estate on multiple occasions and had reportedly observed behavior that disturbed him enough to contact investigators. Baumeister appeared at first glance to be a typical Christian suburban father. He owned several Save-A-Lot thrift stores and lived with his wife Julie and their children in a large home in Westfield. They went to church each week and were overall regarded as a happy family. However, he was also known in the community for some odd behavior, but nothing that suggested the horrors hidden in his backyard. What makes this case even more complex is the lack of a formal criminal trial. According to the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office, Baumeister was never charged. Before police could bring him in for questioning following a search warrant approval, Baumeister fled to Canada. In June of 1996, after Baumeister's wife allowed police to conduct a search while he was away, investigators began uncovering thousands of bone fragments and partial skeletal remains on the estate grounds. These were not buried in neat graves, but scattered, burned, and disarticulated in wooded areas and near an indoor pool. The forensic task was enormous. At least 11 distinct individuals were identified based on dental records and DNA testing, although estimates suggest the total number of victims may be much higher, some claiming close to 50 to 60 total bodies. Baumeister's body was discovered at Pinery Provincial Park in Ontario, Canada, shortly after his disappearance. According to the official report from Canadian authorities, and confirmed by US law enforcement, he died by a single self-inflicted firearm wound to the head. He left behind a note, but it made no mention of the murders or the remains found on his property. With Baumeister deceased, there was no trial, no confession, no direct closure for the families of the victims, and unfortunately for a time, little to no further efforts were made on the case. The FBI and Hamilton County Coroner's Office have confirmed the identities of several of the victims using DNA evidence, but many remain unidentified to this day. Over 10,000 fragments were found, bone shards, teeth, and burned remains, all cataloged and archived for ongoing analysis. Recent developments as of 2024 include a partnership between local police and forensic genealogy labs. Using advanced DNA phenotyping and familial matching, investigators hope to finally give names to the many who were lost and are still unidentified. Despite the decades that have passed, the Baumeister case remains open. It has not been classified as closed, given that several victims remain unidentified and further remains could still even be found near or on the Fox Hollow property. The current owners of Fox Hollow Farm have cooperated fully with law enforcement in subsequent investigations. There are ongoing efforts to recover additional evidence and allow cadaver dogs and GPR scanning to resurvey the land. This is a case where justice was unfortunately cut short, but not ended. Herb Baumeister was never convicted, never confessed, and yet forensic evidence seems to be overwhelming. However, there are still questions being asked, and many are highly suspicious of the involvement of more than just Baumeister in these crimes. How could one man carry out that many crimes while living a full and busy life? Even further, how could he move so many victims into the surrounding woods where the remains were found without some form of help? While Baumeister may have escaped the courtroom, his secrets are still being unearthed to this day. Since he was never taken into custody or interviewed in regards to the case, we don't have any footage of his behaviors. However, we do have footage of someone related to the case, the man who initially tipped off law enforcement, Anthony Goodyear. In a recent docuseries streaming on Hulu and Disney+, it was revealed that Goodyear was mentioned in a call between Baumeister and his lawyer shortly before Baumeister's death. In the call, Goodyear is accused of being a bad person that struck such a fear in Baumeister's psychology that he even mentioned that he was afraid for the safety of his wife and son after he was passed. Other interesting details circle around Goodyear as well. He admittedly lied to the police in his initial investigation. He spoke of being afraid of a firearm being located in a room well before he would have known of its existence. He spoke of feeling terror being in Baumeister's presence the very first night he met him, but opted to stay the entire night despite having both the time and ability to leave. There are many more details surrounding Goodyear, and many of them will be covered in today's analysis as I dissect his nonverbal communication during an interview that he did for the Fox Hollow Murders documentary. With this interview being the first unmasked showing he had done since the initial police interrogation, I will be analyzing his nonverbal and verbal patterns in order to hopefully gain a little bit of a peek into his psychology and help us determine just how involved he may or may not have been. This interview is fairly lengthy, so it will be broken up into two different parts to maintain a little bit more of a viewable length here on YouTube. While the first half does have important information held within, I feel that the second half has even more revealing portions, so just make sure you stay tuned for that portion as well. Finally, just as a reminder, this video is meant for education and entertainment purposes only and should not be used in any way as professional or legal evidence. Now, let's go ahead and start the analysis.
This is kind of a groundbreaking moment because you've never shown your face on camera.
I have done silhouette, never before a face-to-face interview with the camera.
Why now?
There was a time when people were alive, had something to be afraid of. Now, it's been 30 years. It doesn't bother me anymore. So, hello, everybody. This is Mark Goodyear.
Gonna go ahead and pause here just to make some notes about some stuff that you'll be seeing here. Since this is from Hulu and Disney, I've done some editing around to try to mess with the visuals enough to keep it from getting claimed. Who knows? It still will likely be claimed, but that's what you're noticing here with all the painterly stuff in the B-roll. Now, speaking verbally about Mark's presentation here, he's already presented himself in a third person side of things, which is fascinating to me. There are going to be some interesting tics that he has verbally as we go through this, but something else that has been noted to be able to give you a little bit more context is that he's fairly theatrical and he enjoys telling stories. Multiple people have mentioned this. You can see it throughout the documentary. It's also mentioned on some of the reports, things like that, but that shows up fairly prevalently here. Now we're going to talk about why that could be and some of the indicators that are pushing us in various directions as this goes on here, because it does seem fairly revealing. But let's go ahead and continue watching through this and gathering information.
Everything we know about this case
Mhm.
comes from you.
Absolutely.
Absolutely what?
Everything you know about this case comes from me. You just said that. I agreed with you by saying the word absolutely. Where are you confused? Okay, I'm sorry. When I say absolutely, I mean yes. Everything that you know about this case comes from me. I realize that. I'm aware of that.
Okay, I'm wanting to make note of the emotional crashes that he's doing here. So, speaking on average, emotions have a profile. They build up and they fall off, and this follows a fairly predictable profile. What strikes me as interesting is that his emotions are crashing. They're not building up and falling off. He's one state and then he'll smash into another state and then he'll fall back out of that state very, very quickly. To me, that lets me know that they are somewhat controlled. If you see the profile, they're less likely to be controlled. If you see them crashing like this, they have some intentionality behind that display. Also, what is causing this emotional crash is it seems to be frustration with the interviewer playing dumb, perhaps, or wanting to pick away at this word absolutely. And you see Mark lock in pretty heavily. There's no happiness, there's no glee, there's no joy, none of the emotions that we saw before. It's just locked in, cold, hard. He's concentrating and he's making a point. And as he's going through, and this is a fairly intense point that he's making off of something that's fairly inconsequential, he then realizes like, oh, this is pretty intense. I'm coming across as pretty intense, and smashes into this laughter that's very overt, verbose. Again, it's pushing me towards all of this being presented as a play, which then falls in line with the character description that we had heard earlier from multiple other accounts of him appreciating being in this role of storyteller and putting on somewhat of a play and an act. Some other context to keep in mind is that he has and will, you'll even see in this interview, admitted that he willingly lied to law enforcement. Now, there's a lot around that goes into that, not the least of which was the culture of the day in regards to homosexuality and the support that was around that. So he felt that he might need to embellish perhaps to get attention, but then also there are other areas that the cultural circumstances don't excuse. We'll see them as we continue through.
Now, let me tell you a very, very interesting story. Okay?
Again, even from that little blip there, you see he very much enjoys being in the spotlight, having attention on him. He's telling a story and he knows that everybody's listening. I think he enjoys that power, judging by how he's handled every other circumstance. He enjoys the power of being the one who's being noticed and listened to and paid attention to. That's important as we continue.
Oh, this home feels so nice and comfortable. It just wraps itself around you.
What? So keep in mind, this is the house that many people were strangled in or murdered in some form. The strangulation was the primary one, but there have been mention of other forms of murder as well. And he himself claimed to have been witness to there being bodies around. And so this statement of, oh, this house is so comfortable and warm and wraps itself around you, maybe he's being sarcastic in this area, but even the fact that he's trying to make a lighthearted joke, at very best, he's making a lighthearted joke about this house, it adds some context for how he psychologically deals with the trauma of witnessing these horrific things, these brutal things that he claims that he was merely a witness for. His psychology is not adding up to this. So far, what we're understanding about Goodyear is that he not only loves to have attention put on him, he likes to be a little bit more verbose and theatrical, but he also has a tendency to emotionally detach from traumatic instances or experiences. These are important things to make note of his psychology as we're continuing through this, because it helps us understand more and more where he's coming from and highlight some of these issues that I have.
Dave, how you doing? Great. Okay, we can go. So, Mark,
Yes.
and you're gonna just look at me if you can.
Okay.
How you feeling?
Oh, I'm fine. Now, with the interviews, it's been 30 years. I'd like for this to be my very last one. Wouldn't that be lovely? Not to be disturbed with this anymore. So let's get names, get identifications, get, whatever it is that this may produce.
So with that, non-verbally speaking, there's not too much to go off of, but verbally speaking, what he's doing here is he's taking control of the interview. He's the interviewee, and that's rarely the person who's in control of the interview, but he does take that control. He says, you know what? One, I want this to be the last one that I have to do, which he doubles back on multiple times throughout this very interview, where he's saying, that's a story for another time, another interview. We'll have that later, sort of thing. So it doesn't seem as though he wants this to be his last one, but he does say that here. And then after that, he starts trying to already direct the interview. Oh, let's get this, let's get that, let's do this, and let's do that. Now, that direction of the interview can be for multiple different reasons. Perhaps he's fed up with interviews, but he hasn't done a ton, but it could be. Maybe he's just fed up with it. He's fed up with the circumstances around it, so he wants to cut to the point. That is not supported by anything else. Everywhere else, he seems to revel in this attention. The other possibility is that he wants to control that interview so that direction is given from him. Certain details can be avoided. He can manipulate around other ones, things like that. And that lines up very, very well with what we see throughout the rest of this interview. And again, it's going to be in two parts. And at the very end of this interview, there is a fantastic portion that I really appreciate. And it seems to highlight some more psychology that, like I said, is fairly revealing, but that'll be in part two. So again, stick around for that. But already we're seeing him thriving off of this attention, wanting the control, having psychological separation from traumatic events. It's interesting.
Now, what your question was? I'm sorry.
So why don't you tell me the story that you told the police?
Okay, now,
about
if I
how you
might,
met her.
if I might, please. Is it a club called Five?
Okay, so it cuts off there, obviously. The documentary does its own thing after that to explain what he's about to. But again, as he's talking here, he's trying again to control the conversation, how the interview is flowing. This is now 2 points of control, and it's only a couple minutes into this interview here, which I feel is fairly revealing about who Goodyear is. But we've got a lot still to go through.
Called 501. I ran into Herbert Baumeister. He was staring at that wall, floor to ceiling, missing persons posters.
I could tell that he was very gratified to look into these posters. It was not a normal encounter.
So he's now admitting that he's able to calculatedly observe people. He understands what their nonverbal communication is. He has a level of intelligence. I do not believe that Goodyear is a dumb person. It seems as though he is fairly quick on his feet while thinking and being able to read people. Nonverbally speaking, as he's saying these things, I do still believe that what he's saying is authentic here. He's doing little micro nods up and down as he's saying these things, and that would be considered synchronized. Again, if you've been on the channel for a minute, the smaller the movement, the more likely it is to be a subconscious movement. If it gets bigger, you can more easily consciously control larger movements. So the fact that they're so small and they're synchronized with, I would believe that this could in fact be how he met Baumeister. There's more to see.
So I went up to him abruptly, discussed the posters with him.
What'd you say?
Just talking to him about the posters. Just, these are our friends. These people are missing. I'd really like to know what happened to Alan Goodyear.
So here we have another instance of understanding of Goodyear's character. Very forward, very confident, observant, and even in an area where it could be seen as perhaps eerie, he's observed a person seeming gratified or happy or contented looking at a missing person's wall. And then his response is to I'm gonna go up and talk to this person. So we're understanding the psychology behind Goodyear. He likes to be in control. He likes to be able to have a bit of the center of attention. He has what seems to be little issue emotionally with traumatic events or concepts. And this is all showing up here so prevalently, immediately here. And that fits with a couple possible reasons. And we'll talk about them as we continue on through.
I just shoved him out the back door. He had made no effort at all to fight back or resist. It was just me dominating him. Okay? So now we're outside. We're in the dark. You see.
So he is using supporting nonverbal communication as he's telling the story. I pushed him outside and you see him pushing outside, and then he uses eyebrow flashes very regularly when he's trying to make points. And eyebrow flashes are, again, to amplify what's being spoken about. So as he's saying, now we're in the dark, we're outside, and he starts raising his eyebrows, he's wanting to hammer that point home. But even in the documentary itself, and I was not able to track down the full interview without the documentary's editing, I did the best that I could combining it to how it seemed to actually flow, but I could not find that. And there didn't seem to be any tangible reason why he would want to amplify that they were in the dark, except to perhaps add to the story of it, to add more drama to it. Again, reveling in the attention that he has when he's telling a story and everybody's on the edge of their seat. It's still an interesting character tick that he has here, but he even here admits to some of this more controlling aspect of his personality that he has, and it's shown up in other areas where he hasn't mentioned it.
I got into the passenger side of his car.
Big manipulator there. I got into the passenger side of his car. Maybe it's because it's early on in the interview and he's still adjusting. He does have a lav mic underneath us. We saw him trying to hook it up at the beginning. So maybe there's some itchiness or just some discomfort in regards to that. But as he's saying, he got into the passenger side of his car to have that manipulator in here, especially around the suprasternal notch. That could be an indicator of some insecurity. And so if he's feeling insecure in that area, the question is, what is that insecurity? What's the driving force behind it? Is it because he regretted getting into the car at that point? Or is it because that was a point of important information and he's trying to mask that in some way? It's not possible to say off of that small blip, but he does have that manipulator come in there with those possible reasons. It's just something we need to make note of as we continue.
We came up 31, talking, discussing, getting to know one another. Came out to the farm, and he done a bunch of cocaine. That's when he started talking about how silk was as strong as steel or stronger than steel, and a silk necktie around the throat. I told the police that he attacked me. He didn't attack me. Nothing like that. He had the vacuum hose to the pool, and he just, like a hula hoop, that way, and just gently touched my throat with it. Okay? And then he took it away. We went out onto the
So, very visual language as he's speaking about this. He's showing what he is talking about. He's gesturing to areas. This does still seem to fall in line. And also, obviously, this is the point where he says, I never was attacked. That was a lie. I lied to the police. Be for whatever reason it was. He obviously has no issue lying to anyone to be able to get the communication that he wants to across. And this could be because he felt like he was isolated. He doesn't seem to be that kind of person that feels very isolated, and nor was his friend circle very small. He was well known and had a lot of friends because he seemed to be this type of person that, again, could hold a person's attention. You would want to listen to him, that sort of thing. But as he's describing this action of putting a hose around his throat and it just touching there, you then see that he's not having any traumatic recollection of this. This is something that he's taking a level of revelry in, even down to the lip bite at the end there with the smile. That cheekiness is in there, and that's not indicative of somebody who went through a possible strangulation moment that was against their will. It seems to be something that he took some sort of psychological enjoyment in, as indicated by his nonverbal communication. It's really painting a very complex character that is Goodyear, and there's still just so much to be able to add to that.
We went out onto this back porch, and I think he was going to kill me then. And he pointed to the berm that's up high, and there were embers glowing there from a fire. And you could clearly see, looked like human forms. I think he was trying to get a rise out of me. I just continued to act like everything was normal. There wasn't.
Okay. So, non-verbally speaking, there's not a lot to go off of, but verbally speaking, he's already admitted here that he was feeling a level of fear, that he was worried that this person that he had just met, and they did not really know each other outside of the small conversation that they had in the bar and then on the drive to the farm, did not know this person. He was afraid that they were going to kill him. And that's a very important aspect of things. And that would make sense with what he says here. If he's like, oh, I'm just trying not to act like anything's alarming, because maybe that could be a psychological trigger. If you start acting sporadic, then perhaps that's going to instigate some form of negative action. So keeping calm in that area would make sense, especially if you're trying to plan a way to get away. There's no connection here. They don't have each other's information. It's just even pseudonyms that are being used, as we know that Goodyear went by Tony, which was not his name. His name's Mark. And so using pseudonyms, which was also common in the culture at the time, it does not make sense that there would be any form of informational blackmail that could be happening there, that Baumeister knew things about Mark that would keep him there and keep him from running. So he's said that he's afraid of dying here, of being killed here, and he's trying to keep calm, and there's going to be some details that are added.
There wasn't anything at all amiss. But that's when he took me over to the pool. But after I'm out there with him and I realized, oh shit, I gave him something. I knocked him out. I drugged him. He really got a kick out of that when I knocked him out. It was like, you're the rough stuff, and all this crazy crap.
Did he say that the next morning?
No, he was only out for like 40 minutes. Okay? You've never been drugged, have you? It don't last. Anyway, so.
Okay, nonverbally speaking, obviously the disconnect of what is being spoken of to the emotion that's being displayed. It does seem to be fairly authentic display in this as you see the emotional profile. He actually starts with the smile building and the excitement building, which then spills out into this fit of laughter that he has in regards to being drugged and drugging people. He obviously is familiar with the process of either drugging people or being drugged. And I have never personally been drugged myself. I have spoken to people who have been drugged, especially against their will, and not a single person thought that it was a very fun or exciting experience, one that at all was deserving of a fit of laughter. And oftentimes, the people that have been drugged have not been drugged so many times that they're familiar with the timeline of things. So he's admitting that he understands the timeline of being drugged. He finds it to be genuinely funny, as indicated by the genuine emotional profile that he shows around it. But then also, speaking again of this concept, this idea that he's built of being afraid that he was going to be killed himself, he drugs a person, which again it's all a slew of moral issues with drugging a person against their will. But then on top of that, he sticks around instead of drugging the person that he's afraid is going to kill him, as he even said that he saw possible bodies out in the embers, the light of the embers. He drugs a person and then he hangs out. He just sticks around and waits. And again, this is a complex response to what would be a possible murder situation. Out of all of the other cases that I have ever looked at here on the channel regarding serial killers and the victims that escaped those serial killers, not a single time in any of them throughout the decades of serial killers has the victim said, "Oh, well, I drugged them and then I hung out," or "I just stuck around when I had an opportunity to leave." The first thing that they all want to do is to get out of that situation. The risk of having your own life taken is plenty of an instigator to get out of the situation. Some people have brought up the possibility of like, "Oh, well, doesn't that sound kind of like victim blaming? If you say, 'Why didn't you just leave?' Doesn't that sound like victim blaming?" Which those words do sound like victim blaming, but the difference in that is the context around it. There wasn't informational blackmail. There wasn't a rapport that had been built. They barely knew each other. At this point, they were still just a hair above acquaintances. So that connection that oftentimes keeps a person who is being abused in a situation, that didn't exist there. So with this, he had every means possible to get out of this situation, down to the person was fully unconscious. Leave. Get out. That's the time to do it. But he didn't. It makes people ask questions, and I feel like those are valid questions, regardless of what your stance is on the case. Why would you stick around at this early on of the stage? Again, even if it was a thought of like, "Ooh, maybe he'll track me down," they didn't share information yet. He said that he had not shared information yet. That comes later. So no information has been shared. If he just pieced, if he just ran, there was no way that Baumeister could find him again. No information on it. But alas, that's not what happened.
No, it only lasted like 40 minutes. And he was up. He was up. He was up, vivacious, awake, alert, wide-eyed. Wow, you knocked my shit out. He was jovial about it. The fog was so thick down here that you could not see your hand in front of your face. And the mannequins were in that fog with you. And then that's when he would start up his little games that he would like to play in that fog.
The mannequins is a fascinating thing, and obviously this video is more centered around Goodyear than it is Baumeister. If there was more footage of Baumeister, then I would be able to do a video more centered around him, but there's just not. I could probably do one without the body language side of things, but I don't know if you're here for that. You're kind of here for the body language stuff. So focusing on Goodyear largely in this video, but that mention of the mannequins is fascinating. And Baumeister has had multiple instances of those mannequins being mentioned and being prevalent in his life. And with the crimes and how Baumeister went around with those crimes, they're all centered around this control and in an area where he obviously felt a level of a lack of control, especially as a gay man in a Christian conservative area, there's not a lot of control that you can have in that area. And so if you don't have the ability to control the people around you, control the things that look like the people. And so he had those mannequins prevalently everywhere, including in his house, around his pool. Very eerie, very strange psychological tick there that he has. And it obviously didn't seem to affect Goodyear enough for Goodyear to want to draw separation between the two of them. In fact, he ended up keeping that separation almost negligible. They stayed very close.
Very, very frightening.
What were the games?
He wanted you to reach.
I don't know about that very, very frightening thing. There was nothing that indicated emotionally and non-verbally behind that statement that would push me to believe that Goodyear felt very, very frightened at this point. I mean, he also had claimed that he was scared he was going to be killed earlier, and that didn't change anything. So I don't at all buy that the mannequins in the mist were very, very frightening to him. I don't think that actually shook him too much. Now, this next part, we're going to watch his nonverbal communication as he relays this information, but I have muted it because it's not a great thing to hear. It's a description of what happens during strangulation. Physically, it's not fun to listen to, but we will watch to see what we can non-verbally throughout it.
Repeat after him. I really like to see. Yeah, you'd have to recite this to him, word for word.
Okay, so leading into that, he's doing a very overt and intentional gesture here. Repeat after him. So that lets us know that he's in control of what he's doing non-verbally throughout this. Oftentimes, I think he's very in control of his nonverbal displays. However, it's still very hard to control all of the avenues of nonverbal communication. Oftentimes, there will be areas that slip through, and if it doesn't slip through nonverbally, you're so focused on that it'll slip through verbally, things like that. But he's very in control here, and then he starts into his recollection. And from there, all of the positive emotion that he had has fallen away from his face. It seems to be either resting neutral or perhaps a little bit of a negative set to his face, with the corners of his mouth being downturned slightly. You see a portion where he looks up and he squints ever so slightly. I think that he's actually recollecting things that were said and were requested of him to say. I don't believe that he's blowing smoke at this point or adding some theatrics. I think that that's actually the case here. Again, I'm not including the actual words themselves because it's disturbing. If you want to go and hear what he says, go watch the documentary. It will add a lot of context to this anyway, but non-verbally speaking, it seems to be synchronized with what he's saying there. I don't see any reason to not believe him.
For word. I thought, oh shit, he's strangling them people, and this is what he sees when he's strangling them people.
How many people do you think he killed?
Oh, he told me 56. 56.
How did this even come up in conversation?
Fascinating. He does say, oh, he told me, breaks eye contact. So that breaking of eye contact could be seen as wanting to divert eyes because you're feeling uncomfortable with something. However, it has also been shown quite regularly that when a person is genuinely recollecting something, they will break eye contact off to the side. It allows them to process information a little bit better. Oftentimes, you also see a narrowing of the eyes as they're computing a little bit more. They're trying to recollect something. Then as he responds 56, he does a little micro nod with it, 56, and then he does it again, 56. I didn't see anything else across the rest of his nonverbal communication that would push me away from that. If I had seen a 56, but then he does a full reposturing, or he does a pretty big manipulator, or there's a big change or increase in his hand wringing, anything like that, then I would be like, perhaps that's not quite true. Maybe there's more, maybe there's less, something along those lines. But not only does he have a fairly specific number, his nonverbal communication does seem to fit with it. From what I'm seeing, Goodyear seems to be pretty good at mixing both truth and deceit into a story in a way that presents what he wants people to see. And this is something that is very common in people who are good at lying. Very rarely is a good lie consistent of all falsehood. It has some little tidbits of truth in there. Not only one, will your body react more positively to those tidbits of truth, but then also it allows you to have a little bit of psychological relief from having to come up with all of these details. However, since he has so much footage here, it's very hard to keep up with that little moments of truth without letting things slip through the cracks in other areas, which is what we're looking for and what we've been picking up on. It's all important information as we're continuing.
It's even come up in conversation, like, how did he say it?
He wasn't telling me like a confession. I don't think he had a friend in the world. I really, really don't. In that kind of desperation, I think you reach out for anybody. And I feel so responsible. I feel so badly about that. Because I had every opportunity just to kill him.
Do you know anything?
Yeah, okay. All right. Not the takeaway that you want to have for that. It's not, I could have just killed him there. That's a problematic response to it in general. But speaking non-verbally throughout that, as he's trying to speak through this, he doesn't maintain a single emotion throughout it. It's this jumbled pile of a whole bunch of different things that he's trying to display. As he's getting to certain parts, you hear him try to force some emotion into his voice. And then right shortly thereafter, all of that emotion is completely gone and it's replaced by something else. Again, this is all pushing me to believe that this is extremely acted up, which fits again with his character profile of loving the attention, of telling a story and being the center of that attention, which this is where I can start, I guess, revealing some of how I feel about him, which fits with what a serial killer or a repeat offender in areas like this will do. They want the attention for the things that are atrocious. Oftentimes in other instances, in other cases, they'll mention gruesome details and watch the people that they're talking to see how did that affect you psychologically. And they'll revel in the effect that they have. It gives them a sense of control. And he falls directly into that pattern. He falls directly into that pattern repeatedly. As he says certain things, he'll check in and be like, I need to see how this is hitting. I want to know what sort of effect I'm having on the people around me. I want to know how I'm controlling how the people around me feel and what they think and what they understand. He'll do that regularly. And the fact that he stayed so close to this case, he's been the one that's like, oh, I'll offer interviews, I'll do whatever. But in those interviews, he wants control of the direction of it. So if he's going to do an interview, one, he's even admitted he's the only person that has told them anything about this whole case. That's pretty good if you're one of the people involved in it. If you're one of the people involved and you're the only one giving out the information, you can build whatever case you want to. And he seems to be very comfortable doing that, even at the cost of it being a bold-faced lie, as he admitted in his interrogation. As we're going through this, a lot of puzzle pieces are fitting together to his character, and it's not looking super great.
Do you know anything about Herb's videography?
Oh my goodness. There was a pull-out sofa.
He uses that breathing thing, that thing, multiple times throughout. It's very easily controlled. Anybody can give a shaky, deep breath to imply that something's difficult for them. Like, even for instance, now it could be like, no, like, yeah, fake it. Sure, go ahead. And people, if they're wanting to be empathetic, they'll be like, oh, he's having a difficult time here. It's a very easily, consciously controlled thing to do that is simply a manipulator. And then after that, obviously there's a cut here because it's the documentary, but after that, that emotion again falls away. He's not speaking in that very concerned, psychologically troubled state that he was just trying to present. He's speaking in his normal, I want attention patterns that we've seen before. Very interesting contrast that we see behaviorally for him as we're going through.
Sofa underneath that vent. I made a bed. Well, he showed me some pretty graphic stuff. Bad. You couldn't make it out. It was like having a camera right up against something. Okay, you're not going to be able to tell what is going on. But the minute you got a flash of what was going on, it'd make you scream. He'd put his hands inside my mouth when I screamed. They'd grab my tongue, hold my tongue. Oh, it's the most gruesome thing. Hold your tongue, he'd tell you. Somebody put themselves inside of your mouth and grab your tongue. And you're scared to death. You're just scared. You're just terrified. And that's why I'm saying, I beg to die. The man was in.
Very disturbing thing to recount and state. I do have questions about that, even down to like bite, move, turn away. It didn't seem like Baumeister was even close to the size, the build of Goodyear. Goodyear was a mite bigger and taller than Baumeister, so it didn't seem as though there was a physical power dynamic there that would prevent a struggle. And again, we're having this mention of terror, fear, this horror of what was experienced here. And he really is focusing on this weird story about the tongue, but he didn't have that same level of fear and distaste and whatnot when talking about the fact that he saw bodies in ember light sort of thing. A lot of desynchronizations throughout his storyline. It's interesting what he tries to present as affecting him heavily emotionally and what he doesn't. Again, I think that he's extremely intelligent, and I think that aspects of this are done in such a way and performed by him in such a way to throw people off of his trail. If he's used to observing people, as we even, understand earlier where he could see Baumeister was feeling a certain way, if he's used to doing so, then it would also make sense that he could orchestrate and perhaps guide the emotional state of the people around him. And so that could be it. He could be throwing up some red herrings here. But that desynchronization to me is fascinating. Why is this so much more troubling and traumatizing for him to speak about than the fact that he saw bodies earlier in a person's backyard? It doesn't make contextual sense. It doesn't seem to make psychological sense. And again, mentioning this fear and terror, he never again acted on. He never tried to draw distance. He never tried to leave from that situation. He even stays there overnight, which will be mentioned either in this half or the second half. I'm not sure. He stays all night long while Baumeister is fully asleep. Again, another instance where he could leave. No information was traded. They probably are still using pseudonyms at this point. And it was even mentioned by one of the people in the documentary that he had been in a relationship, that this person in the documentary, not Baumeister and not Goodyear, this person had been in a relationship with this other person. And it wasn't until months afterwards that he finally revealed, like, oh, this was a pseudonym that I was using. It was safer for them at the time because to be a gay person in the culture at that time, it was a pretty big risk. You could get fired, you could get hate crimes against you, things like that. So pseudonyms were necessitated often and held onto very dearly. So it would make logical sense that they're still being held onto in this instance as well. And again, he mentions later that he doesn't share his phone number until much later. It's all, there's just details that make this really, really messy and hard to see Goodyear in any light other than suspicious.
The man was insane. Okay, he was clinically insane.
A lot of people who've followed this, they think that you only spent one night total with her, but you had a relationship with her.
I don't want to describe that as a relationship.
Were you guys romantic?
We'll save that for another one as well. How about that?
But you saw him more than just that night.
Interesting. So he doesn't want to describe it as a relationship, but he doesn't expand as to why. And then, when pressed a little bit, was it romantic? He also diverts that as well. Let's save that for another one, which I'm assuming another one is an indicator of probably another interview, something along those lines. But again, this question of your connection to Herb outside of this narrative that you're painting, when pressed about that, he does everything to squirrel around it, to subvert attention, to let information slip away, anything that he can do that doesn't allow people to maybe build a little bit more accurate of an interaction between the two of them. Again, this is a manipulation point, and he's doing it in such a way that it is so comfortable for him, you can tell he has done it repeatedly. Interesting details we're getting.
The man stalked me. Okay? When I left here after that first night, he dropped me off at my car. I immediately bolted to drive to my grandmother's home. He must have followed me because he shows up at my grandmother's home. This is like within a week. He was stalking me, and I realized that, yeah, because I had gave him my address after he showed up at my grandmother's home.
So he was coming to your grandmother, so you gave him your address.
Yes. Gave him the address and gave him the other phone number to get him out of her home. So he started coming over to my house at that time.
How often would you see him?
All right. So, a very scary situation to be stalked by somebody. Very invasive, lot of out of control feelings around that. Everybody responds differently. I still find it interesting that his approach was to give him his address instead, and he says other phone number. So I'm wondering if he was working off of two phone numbers, perhaps one that was used around his pseudonym style of thing to where he kept his identity a little bit more under wraps, and then another phone number that would be for the public, something along those lines. I'm not sure what this other phone number is, and it's not really touched on from where I could find any reports on outside of that. But this is the moment that he has now shared the information. And he's accusing Baumeister of stalking, which is a terrifying situation and very upsetting. Gives Baumeister genuine information for where he was. Let's continue now.
Oh, spontaneously, things were getting real bad, I guess, in the marriage. He would show up upset about things like that. He was stalking me. I turned around and started stalking him. There's an alleyway that connects all the bars in downtown Indianapolis. I'd stalk him through that alley corridor, stalk him, chase him from bar to bar.
To me, this is indicative of the psychology behind it. It doesn't seem as though Goodyear was feeling a physical threat from Baumeister. If anything, it would have been an informational threat, blackmail threat sort of thing, especially if there was videotape of certain instances or things like that, classic blackmail situation. To turn around and want to stalk a person that you're accusing of stalking you through a dark alleyway, it doesn't fit with the concept of I feel at physical risk from this person. Perhaps it is, and perhaps this was just a really bold way for him to try to regain control of an out-of-control situation. But again, if he felt like he was at immediate physical risk from the person, isolating yourself in a dark alley with them and following them doesn't seem to be the best way to go about self-preservation. Seems risky at very, very best, giving him full benefit of the doubt. It just seems like a questionable way to address a stalker that you feel at physical risk from. So perhaps this was something centered around informational blackmail, and that was the control situation and whatnot that he had here. But now at this point, we're seeming to have to jump through so many different hoops to make these facts fit that it's becoming less and less likely. So often the most simple answer is the truth. That's not always the case, but it very often is. So now the fact that we're jumping through so many different hoops of different sizes and complexity, and they're moving all over, it's starting to become less and less likely that this narrative is the genuine narrative. And again, Goodyear has had a history of overtly lying to law enforcement, to people around, so what's to stop him from lying throughout all of this as well? And we're starting to see these incongruencies in his narrative, which again would be an indicator of possible deceit. It's complex.
Now, I'd stand up on furniture, scream out to the crowd, "Don't nobody leave with this man. He is the killer." Well, he'd stand there with his hands in his pockets. They ain't never gonna believe you. They ain't never gonna believe you. You know, they're not gonna believe you. They think you're crazy. A lot of people will ask me, you know, why did you go on and continue interacting with this man or having anything at all to do with this man or anything else? Hell, I'd gone to the police the moment
I had left his company. I was on the phone to the police. Any move that this man made, I was on the phone reporting it to the police.
Even when we showed up at your house?
I'd sit there on the phone with the police with him in my house. Didn't bother him. They ain't never going to believe you. They are never going to believe you. They think that you're nuts. They are never going to. He was that sure of himself. I was on that phone 6, 7 times a day with the police. And yet they're telling me, oh, we can't find the place. I said, well, I certainly can.
So this storyline, it's cut up pretty heavily. It's hard to get a nonverbal pattern throughout this. But I was not able to find any supporting evidence of him making this frequent of calls. Now, even in the documentary itself, they admit that the local law enforcement did not want to comment on anything, and that probably could be due to the case still being open, a number of factors and whatnot. But I could not find record anywhere that this frequent of calls ended up happening. And that pushes me towards at least suspicion. However, to play advocate for him here, it was not something that was looked at or taken as seriously, again, due to the culture at the time in regards to homosexuality. Even the initial victims that started going missing were oftentimes not followed up on because they had been ostracized by their communities due to their homosexuality. And so this concept that he's presenting of, I had talked to the police and they just didn't take me seriously, that's not that far-fetched with that context. So it does make it complex for sure, but if you look at it in context with everything else that he has presented, it still is an outlier. That this would be the one moment of what seems to be a genuine emotional response to these very troubling things that he's experiencing. Everywhere else, that has not been his pattern. We're just having to pay attention to patterns as we go.
I said, well, I certainly can't take you up there and put your hand on a stack of dead bodies. I'll be sitting in the Indiana electric chair. You know what I mean? It's just not something that it would be wise for me to do.
But I think that the police said that they drove around with you to try and find the place.
Yes.
And you couldn't find it.
Yes. Yep.
But were you able to find it then and just didn't want to bring him here?
Okay, so you have that story, don't you?
Okay. Again, posed with a very good question. And we're seeing a little bit of, I believe, the genuine processing from Goodyear at this point. All of the emotion fades off, all of the theatrics fade off, and you see him lock in, and you see his eyes darting around quickly. It is a red flag to me to see that pop up there. And it's in regards to a good question. Why didn't you just take them there? You saw that you knew how to get there, as you had already admitted before. So why not just take them there? And instead of responding to that question, again, a very overt diversion of attention and a refusal to answer the question. And part of my difficulty with this is that the interviewer was not very, very tough on Goodyear. Very soft interview style. Everything that Goodyear said, he just caved to immediately. Very little pushback. Never brought up these contradictions in his storyline and pushed at them very hard to add that emotional pressure. There was a very, very soft atmosphere around that interview. And because of that, it allowed Goodyear to control everything. There's only 46 seconds left of this. We'll hear that and then we'll kind of summarize what we have.
Don't you? Why was it that they were showing up at my home telling me, well, Mark, he's a family man, and you ought to leave him alone. That is a family man. Everything about him checks out. Leave him alone. Yeah. 2 years of that, him stalking me and telling me and tormenting me and teasing me constantly and knowing that nobody is coming to help. And he'd tell me that every time. He'd tell me that. Nobody's going to come. Nobody's coming to help you. And he was right.
So we're going to go ahead and stop that there. It's a decent stopping point in the little interview. To, again, play advocate for him is that they just wouldn't listen, and that could be, again, the climate, the culture of that day, especially because Baumeister presented, as we said, the cookie cutter suburban family man. For that to be what this fairly overt homosexual was coming up against in that culture, it was already not going to be a fair situation. So that could be, in fact, true, that that's part of it. The other part of it that I'm left asking is why then didn't he provide any of these extra details that would be more implicative of Baumeister? Some of it I don't think we'll ever really know, especially because it's very difficult, it seems, to get a straight answer out of Goodyear, regardless of what the question is. He does seem to be a pathological liar with this. But it seems as though we're getting a pattern that's showing up here. And what I'm noticing from Goodyear is this desire for theatrics, desire for attention, again, emotional separation from what would be brutal or traumatic instances or experiences or even just narratives. He doesn't show the emotional synchronization with that. We're seeing, non-verbally speaking, a lot of evidence for heavily controlled nonverbal communication, forced and faked, with crashes in between these emotional states. Again, emotions that are displayed at inappropriate times, and emotions that seem to be genuine in these areas that shouldn't be as what he's displaying them to be. We're seeing a desire to control narrative, again, pathological lies, manipulation. All of these things are coming from Goodyear, which it's hard to ignore and it's hard to excuse away. And so as we continue through this, again, stay tuned for the next one as there's more information that's added to it and more context. It's just harder and harder and harder to ignore these fairly blaring red flags. And it really does highlight how this specific type of person functions. And again, he's showing patterns that line up very, very, very clearly with other serial killers and serial offenders. And it's hard for me to look past them. But there's always chances that I've missed things and whatnot. In any case, there's just endless amounts of information that is out there, and oftentimes it's nothing that the public has access to. And if teams of law enforcement aren't able to resolve it, then oftentimes there's some sort of hiccup that we don't understand, something along those lines. So maybe I've missed something. If you actually know some of the information that I didn't mention here, or that you think would add some more context or add some reason behind Goodyear's behaviors, let me know in the comments of this video. Big thanks again to Incogni for sponsoring this video. If you would like to be able to have a little bit more control of your personal information out there on the web, Incogni is a good way to go. It'll help scrub a lot of that information off of the internet for you and take a lot of the pressure off of you doing that. So go check them out. But without further ado, that's all that I've got for the day. My name is Logan, and you have been oh so awesome as you always are, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys.